Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be starting part 5 in the Essenes, Children of the Light, written by Joanna, Prentis, and Stuart Wilson, not in that order. And part 5 consists of 2 chapters, chapter 15 and 16. Neither one is super duper long, so we'll definitely read chapter 15, and then we'll just see where we're at time-wise, and I may add in chapter 16. So Part 5 focuses on the secret core of Essene life. And here we have a little quote that comes from the book written by Dolores Cannon, which is titled Jesus and the Essenes. We had made the breakthrough into the time of Christ and had met one of the Essenes, the most mysterious and secretive group in history. All right, so chapter 15 is titled Secrecy and Security. Say that 10 times. Okay. From the very beginning, we were aware of the Essenes' need for secrecy and their continuous concern for the security of their communities. Although our contact with Daniel got progressively easier, especially when he entered the interlife stage, there was no corresponding movement in the case of Joseph. This was frustrating in a way because Daniel, despite his position as an elder, was clearly a minor player in the Essene drama when compared with Joseph. When I asked Daniel about Joseph's secretiveness, he replied that on Joseph's mind there were many gates and many latches. Although Joseph was able to give us a good deal of information about a number of things, we never found the keys to all these latches during the period of the regression process. Daniel, in comparison, was much more relaxed and open, especially in the interlife, and he even reached a point where he could be quite lighthearted about the whole security issue. So Daniel starts out. You know, when you went to another community, there were 3 questions you knew you must not ask. First, how many people lived there? Second, my page is stuck. Second, how they defended their community. And third, where the other entrance was. And here he chuckles. Usually, there was only one obvious way into the community, but there was always one other hidden entrance, and sometimes several. These entrances would go into tunnels or through caves, depending on the land. But they were always hidden and were always ways of escape in case of attack. We could go down these tunnels or into caves connected to these tunnels and fade into the night, so that even if they had sent a small army, they would not find us. The Kalu taught us that this was necessary, and our skills in making these escape routes saved many a life. And Joanna asks, did you have gatherings with your neighboring Essene communities? Daniel says yes, especially those who were in our group. The communities were grouped together in 3s, and we would share within this group and support the other communities if they ran into trouble. It meant that you always knew there was a safe home for your people, even if your community was overrun and all the buildings destroyed. So depending on the size of the communities, these group gatherings could be quite large, and a time of joyful sharing and celebration. Joanna, and you sent messengers around the communities to link you all up? And Daniel says, yes, we sent travelers from one community to another. They went very carefully and traveled at night some of the time. We got snippets of news that way and from other Essenes who visited us, and from the spokesman for our community when he went to the Greater Council meetings. But despite all that, we were always hungry for news. Joanna, well, I can imagine because there was much rumor and anxiety. Daniel says, yes, many rumors and difficult to get reliable information. We felt like a minority in our own country, surrounded by the great mass of people who were either actively hostile to us or indifferent to our fate. And Joanna says, and because you were so secretive, other people would spread rumors about you? And Daniel says, yes, many false rumors, sometimes caused by ignorance. But there were also people paid good money to do this. People were spreading terrible lies about the Essenes, saying that we did all sorts of vile things, worshiping idols, and so on. Terrible things they said. They felt that if they could blacken our name, then it would be easier to persecute us. Joanna, and the Kalu helped you to set up the defense of your communities? And Daniel says, yes. And we lived very secretly in our own places, and even the ways in which we guarded our communities were secret. The Kalu had given us many abilities, many skills. The use of sound was highly developed by the Kalu. We could produce not only outer sound, but also inner sound, which would make a stranger who walked near our communities just uneasy. It would reverberate inside him, and he would wish to go away. He would not know exactly why. The sound would vibrate inside of him. We would set up vibrations which were different from his own note, and that would make him most uncomfortable. He would feel discomfort and even fear, and would wish to go quickly from that place. He would feel that it was a bad place full of spirits. Perhaps he would interpret it in this way. Joanna says, could you also manipulate energy to make people fall over? That's kind of funny. And Daniel says, yes, we could shift their center of balance from the lower part of the body. We could shift it about and move it higher so that they would become unsteady on their feet and topple over. We would shift the focus of their energy. The Kalu were very skilled in energies. Energy was a special study of theirs, and they passed much down to us. At last, I was beginning to understand how the Essenes managed to survive so long, despite determined attempts by the Pharisees to dislodge them. By siting their communities in remote places where there was no competition for the poorer land, by being very careful and secret in their lives, by constructing elaborate escape routes and having subtle defensive skills, they could cling on and survive for a long time. The choice of such a harsh and inhospitable site as Qumran now made perfect sense to me, and I'm assuming this is Joanna talking. If this was to be their father house, the place in which they kept their most precious things, a remote and forbidding place would be ideal. I also wanted to explore the downside of maintaining all this secrecy. Joanna, what did you see as the problems of being so secret and vigilant? Daniel says the constant burden of secrecy would sometimes seem almost unbearable. Even my old friend Joseph, who was careful and secretive by nature, found it difficult to live in this way. But there is another aspect which troubled me. We were so secretive that the generations to come will not find it easy to know what is in our hearts. This saddens me, for unless you know what is in our hearts, how can you understand us? That is why dialogues such as this are valued by the Brotherhood. In these and in other communications of this kind yet to emerge, we can speak freely, knowing that you wish us well and standing in future time present no hazard to our communities. The Brotherhood wishes that the truth about us be told. We are surrounded by a sea of indifference amongst much of the people, and by many vipers who would harm us. Our enemies have been assiduous in the spreading of lies about us, and it is good that in the future time the truth about us should be known, so that all may see that we have worked for the light, and that's light with a capital L. Once again, the feeling here is that the Essene Brotherhood as a whole was trying to communicate with us, a feeling shared by Dolores Cannon when she was working on her book, Jesus and the Essenes. The words yet to emerge suggest that some of this story remains to be told. And now we have chapter 16, which we should have no issue reading, and that will complete part 5. So chapter 16 is titled The Core Group. And of course, we open up with a bit of an explanation from Joanna. By this time, I had become aware that many of the greater secrets were known to Joseph and not to Daniel. Whatever Daniel knew, he was willing to talk about freely and at some length after he had the approval of the Brotherhood. Joseph, however, was quite different. His replies were often guarded and usually short. He never opened up in the way that Daniel did. At first, I put this down to a difference in temperament, and it was only during a session with Daniel when he was older that I stumbled across the first clue which led me to the real reason. Daniel was talking about the work that the Essenes were doing to support the greater work of Jesus. He said that this support was organized by something that he called the core group. This group would send messengers to the Essene communities, and there were meetings from time to time between the core group and a number of Essene elders. I asked Daniel who the members of this core group were. At first, he would not answer. Even the existence of this group was highly secret. He said, adding that only a few elders in each community knew of it. You could live and work in an Essene community for the whole of your life and never hear anyone talk about the core group, and that's a quote. It was only when he had the approval of the Essene Brotherhood to talk about the inner Essene structure that I was able to get more information about this. Daniel, there was always a core group in the Essene Brotherhood ever since the Kalu first established the communities. During my lifetime, the core group included my friend Joseph, Mary his sister, Joseph her husband, their son James, Mary Magdalene, and John. So we have Joseph, which is Jesus's uncle. We have Mary, which is obviously the mother of Jesus. We have her husband Joseph and one of their sons James, Mary Magdalene, and John. Very cool. After the death of Mary's husband, which would be Joseph, an elder from Qumran held the focus, to be replaced later by Thomas, who became a disciple. The seventh person was someone Daniel referred to as the Silent One. I asked him if this person had another name, and remember earlier in one of the first chapters, we met somebody who was just simply called the Silent One. And Daniel says, when he asked if this person had another name, Daniel says no, nor has he ever come to any of the meetings with the elders, so I never met him. This makes it clear that we are not dealing with Roberta's Silent One, but someone quite different. Okay, so we have, I think they mentioned earlier that there were many people who served as just, their role was to stay invisible and deliver messages, and that required traveling, and that required secrecy, and that required very little. The less that they were known about them, the better. So Daniel says, there is always a place for him whenever the full core group gather, so that they sit 3 and 3 with a space between. Joseph told me that he can feel his energy there, as if he is present on other levels, but it seems that he is never there in person. I know he is a close friend of John, who sometimes speaks of him, but even then he talks only of what he is doing on the inner planes to support the work, and never about him as a person. And here we have a comment by Stuart. It is possible to speculate on the identity of the Silent One, and here his friendship with John gives us a clue. According to the esoteric tradition, John later reincarnated as Saint Francis, and later still as the Master Kutumi. C.W. Ledbetter's book, The Masters and the Path, makes it clear that the Master K.H. or Kutumi had worked closely in a number of lives with his friend, the Master Moria. For that reason, it would certainly seem possible that the Master Moria might be the Silent One. The esoteric tradition also casts some light on the previous lives of John, who had lived in Greece as the sage Pythagoras. Few writers have recognized the major part played by Pythagorean ideas in the development of Essenism, honorable exceptions being Martin Larson in The Essene Heritage, Gordon Strachan in Jesus, the Master Builder, and Martin Hengel in Judaism and Hellenism. The whole composition of the core group is interesting. The first 4 were related by blood or marriage, and the next 2 were disciples of Jesus, as the chapter on Mary Magdalene makes clear. The obvious omission here is Peter, who came to lead the Christian church in the West. However, Peter was the natural leader of the more conventional disciples, and for that reason, it is unlikely that he was an Essene. I wondered if Peter realized that he was excluded from the inner council of those working to support Jesus, and whether this contributed to his irritability, something that will surface in a later chapter. It can't have been easy for a non-Essene like Peter to deal with the clannish closeness of the Essene brotherhood. We knew that Daniel was close to Joseph, but wanted to find out how well he knew the other members of the core group. Joanna, so you knew the core group quite well, apart from the silent one. And Daniel says, we met them from time to time, but I'm not sure you could say I knew them, apart from my friend Joseph. Taking the core group as a whole, I would say we didn't understand them. They were on a higher level than us. They were like teachers, and we knew that they had been told many secret things and could only reveal a little to us. It was at this point that I realized the big difference between Daniel and Joseph. They were close friends, but Daniel knew Joseph was more advanced and was a keeper of many secrets. That was why Joseph was and remained during his sessions with me rather guarded, while Daniel could be more open because his information was less secret. Of course, it would have been better if the talkative one had been Joseph, because he knew so much more. But we were getting a rich harvest of material from Daniel, and for that, I continue to be grateful. Thanks to Daniel's vital evidence on the inner Essene structure, we were now in a position to assess the complex layers of secrecy upon which the Essene organization was founded. Even the communities like Qumran were not the heart of the Essene operation. That was the highly secret work of the core group. As the ministry of Jesus moved to a climax, the work of this group emerged as a key element in the whole drama. But that will become clear as the story unfolds. For the moment, we were content with this extra piece of the jigsaw, which enables us to see the Essene Brotherhood for the first time as one integrated whole. The Essene order had a complex structure resembling a nest of Chinese boxes. So we have 3 different categories: element, main loyalty to, and level of secrecy. So the element that we have first are referred to as the Town Brothers. Their main loyalty was to the Essene order, and their level of secrecy was most open. Then we just have the communities, and their main loyalty was to the Essene order. Their level of secrecy was most open. And then we have the core group, which consisted of a loyalty to Essene teacher of righteousness. So that would be Jesus. And that was the most secret level of secrecy. With these 3 layers of secrecy, the Essenes managed to keep their enemies at bay. Each layer protected the one within it. No wonder outsiders became confused about who the Essenes were and what they were trying to do. The complexity of this structure illustrates how inadequate the written record can be in trying to assess a closed and highly secretive order like the Essenes. All right, so that completes chapter 15 and 16, as well as part 5. And in the next chapter, and in the next part of the book, I should say, is simply titled Jesus. So that will consist of chapter 17, Jesus as student and teacher. Chapter 18, Jesus in Britain. Chapter 19, Being with Jesus. I love learning about Jesus. I really do. And chapter 20, Teaching and Healing. And that will that's part 6 right there. So basically we're going to just be talking a lot about Jesus and probably learning a lot more things that we had no idea of before. And of course, if you followed me reading The Power of the Magdalene, it's funny because they refer to this book a lot, and we learn in Power of the Magdalene that the Essenes liked to come off like they were very put together and very close-knit, but that wasn't always the case. So it's really interesting to read this one first because they get so much more information about the Essenes and their relationship with the female disciples and the disciples of Jesus and so much more. And you realize that there's so much that they still had not touched on in this book and learned about regarding the relationship between the Essenes especially. There was oftentimes issues between them. There was oftentimes issues that, just came from ego and pride and just being a human being, really. Living a really hard life, it sounds like, but one they were dedicated to, one that held such a purpose and such a mission, and a beautiful one at that. Hard doesn't have to mean horrible. Hard can be beautiful. It just depends on how you look at it. And it really seems that the Essenes, they knew that their life was hard, but they also were happy and joyful and had so much of the divine, a connection with the divine, that they didn't care about all that material stuff that we automatically assume equals happiness, right? In today's world especially. Okay, so we'll stop there, and in the next video, we will start part 6. Thank you all so much for joining me. I love you all so much, and until I see you again, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. Bye-bye until next time.